Story 1. She forced me to choose between her divorcing my father or taking her own life. Because I chose the former, she later described the divorce as my idea. Story 2. She told me that she would pick me up later but then left me. 7 hours later, my dad picked me up, crying and telling me that she had left us both. Story 3. I received a message from my father's phone saying he didn't want to see me. She also blocked my number on his phone. My poor dad thought I wasn't texting him back or calling for almost a year. He still texted me every day, even though he didn't receive my responses. She is a horrible person. Story 4. I lost my cat and was shamed for not being there. I was 15 and the poor thing was ill. We couldn't afford medicine. The girl had issues and ended up peeing on the floor. My mother had a tendency to punish animals for misbehavior. She told me to put my cat's face in the urine to teach her. It was awful. I did it because if I didn't, I would face consequences. I was angry with my mother, but I still went through with it. An hour later, my mother said she was taking the cat for a checkup and asked if I would come along. I politely declined. She called me a hurtful name and so did my brother. Later, she came home with an empty cat basket. She had the cat put down without telling me in advance. I didn't know. My brother knew, but I didn't. The last thing I did with my cat was put its face in its own urine. I didn't get to say goodbye. Story 5. She hardly talks to me anymore because she is in a cult. I may have said that the day he dies will be the biggest celebration this country has seen. I should probably update her to say it will be the biggest celebration the world has seen. Story 6. The woman took heroin throughout her entire pregnancy with me. I was born addicted and was extremely ill for a long time afterward. She then abandoned my sister and me when I was 2 years old. My amazing father was forced to get a court order to ensure she saw us every Saturday. Sometimes she would show up and we would spend the day with her. Most of the time she would forget or have some excuse. One of those excuses was that she was recovering from a hysterectomy. At about 5 years old, I didn't really know what it involved, but I understood that it meant she couldn't have more children. One day she just stopped coming altogether, and I never saw her again. Good riddance as far as I'm concerned. By the time she stopped coming completely, I was old enough to understand what was happening, but my sister was heartbroken, and I'll never forgive her for that. About 15 to 20 years ago, my sister was working as a teaching assistant in a local school. It turns out that our mother must have had surgery to restore her reproductive organs because one of her pupils was my mother's new son. She couldn't even be bothered to tell my sister and me that we had a half-brother. When she passes away, I will drink a large amount of liquid and take an extended visit to her grave, happy in the knowledge that she will be spending eternity covered in my disdain. Even that seems too good for her. Story 7. Have you ever seen the movie Mommy Dearest? I lived some of those scenes. She, of course, doesn't remember them or pretends they didn't happen because she is a narcissistic individual. She spent my whole life telling me that I did not experience severe illness as a child and that I never wore leg braces. But I did. I was on the brink of death. I had to learn to walk and talk all over again at 3.5 years old. They told my family to go home and not expect me to live to see the next day. But I did. Every once in a while, I ask a relative just to remind myself that it did happen. I still have nightmares of no wire hangers and seeing the same piece of food on the plate for days. Story 8. She attempted to take her own life and survived. Life became much more difficult afterward. I was told I needed to lose weight to keep my husband, and I was also asked if I was a lesbian because I wasn't interested in dating during high school. I was focused on being an advanced placement student and wanted more for myself. Please tell me she is in the wrong, as she does not see it that way. Story 9. My mom never knew what the worst thing she had ever done was because I never told her. When I was around 9 years old, our house was foreclosed on and my parents separated. My dad and brother moved in with my grandmother, and my mom and I moved into an apartment. She had fallen in love and had an affair with a much younger man before we moved out, and she continued that relationship afterwards until one day when he received military orders requiring him to move to Germany. I hated to see her so heartbroken, but as a 9-year-old girl, I was also somewhat happy because she really neglected me to be with him. I didn't realize it was neglect at the time. I just knew I really missed her and begged her to stay with me instead of going to him night after night, but she never would. She was devastated, of course, but he called her whenever he was able to. One night, when the phone rang and I picked up the downstairs phone to answer, I heard my mom answering on the upstairs phone. I heard his voice respond. I should have hung up, but I decided to listen in. I honestly wish I hadn't. I listened to her go on and on about how much she loved and missed him and how horrible her life was with him gone. I listened to him tell her that all she had to do was say the word, and he'd have her on a plane to Germany to move in with him. I listened to him talk about how amazing it would be, and I listened as my mom agreed that it would indeed be amazing and how she desperately wanted to. I listened as she followed up with the words, "I could be so happy if it wasn't for Reagan. That was enough for me." I put the phone back on the hook carefully and began sobbing quietly. I never told her I had been listening in on that call. I never told anyone until I was in my 30s. She got really sick when I was 11 and died of colon cancer a week after my 13th birthday. She had just turned 42. I'm now 44 and I have a 15-year-old daughter. I've done my best to be to her what I needed my mom to be to me. I've been in therapy, I still am, and have learned how to forgive, grieve, and heal. But sometimes still, I look at my daughter and imagine her overhearing something like that, and I begin to sob quietly, similar to how I cried that night so long ago. Now through a mother's eyes. It hurts like I'm 9, and it hurts like I'm 44. I'm not sure if it will ever completely stop hurting. Story 10. She didn't believe me when I told her that her fiancé made me watch inappropriate content with him and tried to touch me. I was 13. Story 11. For biographical context, I would describe it as choosing to abandon the responsibility of raising my brother and me. There are many instances to consider. One that stands out is when she called me hurtful names, including on my birthday. Another significant moment was when she supported my adoptive father after he made a shocking statement about those who voted for Biden in 2020. Story 12. When I was 12, she said, "If murder were legal, I would have killed you a long time ago." She has done worse things since, but saying that to a child is significant. Story 13. When she ignored me after I told her my brother had strangled me unconscious, I can only assume she once did something worse to someone. Story 14. She took everything from me. Sports, friends, girlfriends, freedom of expression, and my emotions. She was a complete control freak and put me on heavy doses of mood suppressants. The people who knew me said I was a zombie. 14 years after joining the army to free myself from her, I still haven't recovered. Story 15. I called the police when I attempted suicide, not because she wanted them to help me, but because she wanted them to arrest me. Story 16. My mom was a sugar baby for high-class men. The week I turned 14, she took me to the salon to get a fresh set of nails and have my hair done. She then informed me that she had arranged a series of dates for me to go on, saying, "They think you're 18, so you don't have to drink and you don't have to sleep with them if you don't want to." My mom introduced me to her sugar daddy's wealthy friends. Story 17. She gave me a guitar for my 7th birthday. Every time I asked for lessons or a book, the answer was no. 3 years later, she sold it at a garage sale because I never played it. Story 18. I was called a parasite feeding off her in the womb. That same night, I was drunkenly hit around the head. There is much more, but that one always sticks because of the word. Story 19. Decided she wanted another child and thought my child was perfect. Then she went on a months-long smear campaign trying to isolate me and abuse Child Protective Services with false allegations. All while I was dealing with at least 3 other major life events that were difficult enough to handle. I haven't spoken to her in years, and I wouldn't shed a tear if she died tomorrow. I'm happy to say that not only did her efforts fail, but she experienced karma when the lies and manipulations came to light, leading many others to cut her off as well. Story 20. I was made to work at 16 to pay rent. Maybe that doesn't sound so bad. Except my 2 sisters, who were 21 and 26, were also living there with their boyfriends or husbands, and none of them had to pay because they had kids and needed to keep their money. It felt like being punished for not being a teen mom. I had surgery and was prescribed pain medication. I told my mom I needed to take my dose in an hour and a half but had no food. She promised she would be back in time with something to eat. When it was time to take my medication, I foolishly believed she would return soon, so I took it on an empty stomach. I became very sick, shivering and vomiting. She came back 7 hours later. I was obviously upset, and she got mad at me for being angry with her. I was 17. We rarely had food, perhaps because 9 people were living in our house. Another time, I told her I didn't have food to take with me to work. She said she would pick me up for lunch to grab something to eat, but she didn't show up. I had to make do with vending machine snacks. I moved out when I was 18 and, unfortunately, was so blinded to how dysfunctional the situation was that I continued to financially support her until I was 36 years old. My sisters continued to rely on both of us well into their 40s. Right before I got married, literally 2 months before, I paid $3,500 toward their mortgage so they wouldn't be foreclosed on. My sisters did not contribute. What a lovely wedding gift. Once I had my daughter, it felt like a postpartum veil was lifted from my eyes, and I cut off everyone financially. It just hit me. I would never treat my daughter the way I was treated. There was a lot of other stuff too, but I think that illustrates a pretty clear picture. Story 21. Used to blame me for my social anxiety as a kid and told me to behave a certain way so it wouldn't happen again. Luckily, she has changed later, but it really affected me. Story 22. Nothing. She is a great mother. She has always been great. She gave me enough room to find my path in the world while gently guiding me. She had a very traumatic childhood herself but managed to grow out of those circumstances. I am incredibly fortunate to have a loving and caring relationship with both of my parents to this day. Story 23. After she separated from my dad, I chose to live with him because she had boyfriends coming and going. I was a teenager with a newborn, so my dad helped a lot, essentially taking over the mother-daughter bond typically expected when a daughter has her first child. She was convinced I was not only jealous of her for some reason, but also that I was sleeping with my own father. We no longer speak. Story 24. The way she treated me and the things she would say to me when I was a child, also directed at my brother, were hurtful. I would wake up for school and she would yell at me for no reason, calling me names for absolutely nothing. I had to turn on the bathroom fan as background noise to ignore her. She would also say I looked pregnant if I wore certain clothing at age 8 and so on. My dad was an amazing father, but I guess when he and my mom first met, he wasn't the best partner to her. I think a mix of postpartum depression and resentment toward my dad affected how she treated us. After my parents' divorce, my dad made it seem like he had been betrayed by my mom. However, as I got older, I realized she had every right to leave. He was a great father, but he held no accountability for the reasons my mom may have ended up in the mental health crisis she faced. She carried a lot of resentment because of his previous actions. Still, I hold her accountable for how she took that out on us, even though we were good kids. I have sympathy for her as well. Many would say she should have left when things started to go downhill, but she felt she couldn't. She was placed in the foster care system and then met my dad. She was about 15 or 16 when she had my brother, and my father was 6 years older than her at the time. When he cheated on her after she had my brother, she wanted to leave, but that would mean both she and my brother might end up in foster care, possibly being separated from each other. So, yes, I have empathy for her and understand why she acted the way she did. After she left my dad, she entered another marriage, but the man tried to take her life and ended his own. Thankfully, she survived. However, she has endured so much trauma. She told me the people who were supposed to protect her the most never did. But she has been my biggest support system while growing up and has changed a lot. I respect her for that. Story 25. Never taught me about finances and always kept everything secret, including the amount of my college fund. She told me she would pay for everything. Fast forward 3 years into college. She said, "I'm out of money. Figure it out. But I don't want you to get a job because you will do poorly in school if you do." I felt like I was running around aimlessly. Story 26. It is difficult to choose just one situation, but my brother served in the army from the age of 18. She wrote a check to herself from his account, cashed it, and blamed me, denying any involvement. She claimed that I, only 15 or 16 at the time, wrote and signed the check. Meanwhile, he looked into it and security cameras showed it was her. Story 27. I invented a story about myself that was so horrible I had to stop telling new people that I'm related to her. Years ago, I met a new coworker whose daughter was my mother's student. He was shocked to find out that I wasn't in prison. I had never been. He assumed I was an addict, a prostitute, and a thief, as if I was stealing things from everywhere. What I was is a single parent fresh out of an abusive marriage. I confronted her. She said my divorce had been really hard on her, and all of those assumptions could be true. I told her that if she believed any of that, then why wasn't she doing anything to protect my 3-year-old? I haven't seen her in over a decade. Story 28. She said and did many things to me, but the worst was when she told my child she would take him away from us when he was 5. This caused my child to experience extreme separation anxiety for 10 years. It was a nightmare. He has never gone to a sleepover and would panic when we left him during playdates and at school. I had to attend every playdate, school trip, and sometimes come to the school to calm him down when the teachers couldn't. It affected many aspects of his life, and he missed out on numerous experiences because of her. Through a lot of work and therapy, he is finally okay, although he still feels anxious when trying new things that take him away from his comfort zones. She has never been allowed near any of us again. Story 29. My mom was forced to give up a baby for adoption a year before I was born, due to pressure from her parents. To fill that void, she told a man she had gone out with a few times that she was on birth control and got pregnant with me. He did not want to be with her and tried to encourage her to give me up as well, but I was the replacement. I grew up without a father, and my mom dated unsuitable partners intermittently, struggled with addiction, and eventually became a drug dealer. I experienced neglect and loneliness and often wished I had never been born. She passed away from hepatitis C a few years ago. I am now in my 50s, and this still weighs heavily on me. Story 30. She made me her sister instead of her daughter. She made me raise my brother because she was a substance abuser. I had to call the police frequently due to her fighting violently with boyfriends, abusing them and stabbing them. She placed us in the care of people who tortured and abused us so she could party. She sexualized my body at a very young age by slapping me and commenting on my appearance. She went sober and apologized to everyone except us. She continued to physically, mentally, and emotionally abuse us while spending all her spare time supporting young people trying to get clean, behaving insincerely. She emotionally manipulated us for years to keep us in her life. The best thing she did was survive my biological father, who was extremely dangerous and far worse. So, in my eyes, that is her only achievement. Story 31. She told me when I was a teenager that she never wanted to be a mother. We never addressed this. She is gone now. Story 32. I transformed my deepest vulnerabilities into strengths and made me feel like love was something I had to earn. Story 33. She was stricken with Alzheimer's and left me. She was the best mom ever, and I didn't tell her enough. Story 34. Stole our family money and left me as a toddler to travel the world. When I was a teenager, she invited me over, and I saw a wall of photos of her and her new boyfriend. They had been to the Caribbean, swimming with dolphins, and taking helicopter tours, among other things. Story 35. She made me her emotional punching bag and beat me with a cane, leaving bruises all over my body and face. I felt ashamed to go to school because my friends would find out, and they did. It was almost a weekly occurrence, after which she would buy me a gift to assuage her guilt. This was revolting to me, to the point where I struggle mentally to accept any gifts in relationships. She hates me like no one else and blames me for it. She cursed me every day, saying, "You will never be happy in life." I guess her wishes were granted. This space is too small to encompass all the things she has said and done. It's a lifetime pattern that she disregards and mocks me for when I dare to bring it up, saying, "You are always bringing up the past. How can you expect to be happy?" The gaslighting is breathtaking. Story 36. When I was 6 or 7, my mom started openly cheating on my dad but refused to divorce him. My dad was so done with her that he just let her do what she wanted and did not care enough to go through the divorce process. However, since they were still married, my sister, who is 3 years younger, and I had to go everywhere with a filter on because we were not allowed to talk about it with family or friends. She was confident enough to cheat, but not enough to deal with the judgment from other parents. Eventually, all the secrecy turned her into a bully toward my sister and me. One day, my sister actually brought it up in class with a teacher in front of the class. She asked, "What do you do when your bully is a parent?" She was 12 at the time. Story 37. I slept with my first boyfriend, who locked me in a room for several days without food as a teenager. He lied to the school, saying my grandmother had died, and they called me to the office to counsel me, but she hadn't passed away. My mother kicked me out at 16 after making me raise my siblings for years while she partied. She pointed a gun at me and my youngest siblings and continues to cause me problems as an adult. I don't know what's worse. Story 38. 1. She told me that I wasn't smart enough to go to college, so I earned 2 degrees. I asked my then fiancé, now husband, if he was sure he wanted to marry me because I couldn't cook or clean, as she refused to teach me. We have been married for 24 years. When I was involved in a car accident, she convinced me that even though the check was in my name, half of it was legally hers because I was a minor. I was 17 and didn't know any better. I could have used it to buy a car so that I could get a job, but after giving her half, I didn't have enough. Story 39. Left me with the man who abused me, my father, for a few weeks while she stayed with her sister to figure out if she could forgive him. She returned and forgave him. I didn't tell her when he did it again because what would be the point? Story 40. She chose her now husband over her children. I told her repeatedly how he treated us when she wasn't looking and how he treated the dogs, yet she still married him. Also, her choice of wedding date the week after my birthday hurt. She was so caught up in wedding preparations that she skipped my birthday. I got nothing, not even a happy birthday. I didn't mention it at all until my grandmother, whom I share a birthday with, brought it up at the wedding. She asked, "Why didn't we do anything for my birthday?" My mother tried to apologize, but I just got in my car and left. I stayed at my father's that night and cried. He was upset, and I ended up staying with him for 3 weeks. My father and I never got along, so I moved back in with my mother. Things have been different since, and it's coming up on 3 years. I'm working on moving out, but she never apologized, and my birthdays since have been small and not what I wanted. Story 41. When I lost my virginity at 15 or 16 and my mom found out, she said, "I guess you're not the son I thought you were." That cut deep. Story 42. Accused my boyfriend and me of being on drugs because we missed a turn at a place we had never been to at night. Made me take a drug test, then tried to get me to break up with him. By the way, I've never done drugs, and my boyfriend and I are still together. Now she apparently loves him. Story 43. She cut me off because I supported my brother's dream of being in a band, specifically a black metal band, which she views as satanic. Since I support my brother, she believes that I also support the band, but I do not like the music at all. When I asked her if she was cutting me off as well, she said, "I choose Jehovah." She is a devout Jehovah's Witness and prioritized her religion over our relationship, even though I was there for her before she became a witness. Story 44. Constantly reminding me that I was growing up in my deceased sister's shadow, for which I am a replacement child. I was lied to for 30 years about my being a donor-conceived person, just found out about a year ago, actually, thanks to genetic testing. When confronted about it, I was blamed for the lies because I was considered too sensitive to know the truth due to my mental health issues, most of which were exacerbated by my complex post-traumatic stress disorder from my traumatic childhood, which was her fault. When I requested information about my donor to attain medical history ahead of having my own children, she told me I was just looking for an excuse not to have kids and that I should stick with cats. Story 45. This is one of many experiences I've had. She let me believe for 15 years that my father died in a car accident when I was a baby, when in reality he took his own life and he wasn't even my biological father. I discovered this while living in a hotel after our house caught fire when I was 15. She refused to tell me anything about my actual sperm donor, so I had to ask my aunts. Story 46. She showed favoritism by taking my private school tuition and college tuition to help her son buy a house, despite me having the best grades of all the kids. She allowed her sons to bully me and constantly threatened to disown me if I did not let her have her way. She taught me to let others walk all over me, made me feel inadequate, and would only use me to clean up whenever the family needed something. Story 47. Stole my car when I was 19, went on a drug binge, ran the car out of gas, and abandoned it. Then she disappeared for about a week and showed up like nothing ever happened. Story 48. When I was 13, I finally broke down and told my mom I had been actively suicidal for several years. This confession followed a fight that started when I accidentally mentioned that I no longer identified as a Christian. Her response was to call me selfish and send me to a therapist who was an excessively devout Christian. This experience worsened my issues and negatively impacted my relationship with therapy for nearly a decade. Story 49. I told my mom I was really depressed when I was visiting her. She told me with a straight face and direct eye contact that I should just kill myself then. She has never apologized or reached out. I haven't spoken to or seen her since then, and that was 5 years ago. She also used to starve me as a child. I have a poor metabolism and food issues to this day. She also used to take all the birthday and Christmas money I received from my grandparents. My father was complicit and encouraged this behavior. Story 50. She took me to her dealer's house when I was 10 years old and left me downstairs with a man who was passed out while she was upstairs attending to her needs to pay for her habit. Story 51. Given what I have read, I am almost glad to say Alzheimer's. It is unfortunate, but until then, she was pretty remarkable. Story 52. She took her own life when I was 4 years old, leaving me all alone in the world. Having a troubled mother would have been better than having none at all. Sadly, she did not agree. Story 53. I informed the biggest gossips in the small town where I grew up on the day I started my first period. By noon, everyone knew I was menstruating. Story 54. She would beat me every chance she got, grabbing whatever was around to corner me and just go to town, hitting me. Open hand slaps across the face were frequent. She blamed her military upbringing for ruling through violence. I'm pretty sure she sexually molested us kids as well. She was a horrible person. At 13, I stood up to her and said, "Touch me again, and I'll call the police." Child Protective Services were ineffective in the 80s. I went no contact at 17 and left. She finally died a year ago with no one to claim her body, and I think she is still sitting in a cooler. Story 55. I was left in a room alone with a teenage male who had already been in juvenile detention for exposing himself to children. I was a petite girl, and you can imagine what happened next. Story 56. She brought me into the world, so I feel a sense of obligation. Years ago, while I was working for her, she slapped me for saying the wrong thing to a customer on the phone. I also endured her husband's abusive behavior. Aside from my uncle's funeral last year, where she humiliated me, I have not spoken to her since 2012, and it has been a relief. Story 57. Low-key motivated me not to move to California when she knew it was my true life ambition. Had I gone when I wanted to in the late 1990s, I would have gotten in before it became too expensive and would probably still be there today. Story 58. I love my mom, but when my dad lost his job and started drinking, she left. She didn't even try to help him. After over 20 years together, she moved on and found a new partner, and now she is doing well. Meanwhile, he lives in a rundown duplex and has not moved on. Story 59. She flew to the beach where my boyfriend was vacationing and tried to get him to sleep with her. She wore my bikini. I was 17 and she was 42. He did not sleep with her, and she was very upset. That was about 30 years ago. He is gay now. Story 60. She told me I was dead to her and said she wished she wasn't such a good Catholic or she would have had an abortion when she found out she was pregnant with me. Story 61. loved me so wholeheartedly and unconditionally that all other relationships, whether platonic or romantic, do not meet the standard. Story 62. She told my 7-year-old and 4-year-old children, the younger being developmentally disabled, that they were messed up and no longer welcome at her beach house to their faces 3 hours into what was supposed to be a 3-day visit. She lives 30 minutes away, and it was the second time she had seen them in a year. Story 63. I was a troubled youth at 18. She invited me to live with her and her new boyfriend as she and her husband were separating. He had kicked me out of the house while I was still in school. About a week into this, I went to a job interview at my local Wendy's. I was excited. I finally had a job and felt a sense of hope. I returned to her boyfriend's apartment to find him upset in the armchair. He said she had gone back to her husband. I didn't know this man, but he said I could stay there for a few nights until I figured something out. I visited a friend's house in town to discuss living together, and when I returned, the door was locked. I knocked for about 15 minutes before giving up and sleeping outside for about 3 days. I spent the first night in the apartment complex hallway and the second night in a car. Finally, I walked to the next town over about 40 miles to my great-grandmother's house. If you see someone who is cold, hungry, and tired, please help them. Strangers and old friends saved my life when my family refused to lend a hand. Story 64. When I was in labor with my second child, she was helping me time the contractions. During this time, she told me that she recently realized she doesn't really like me. Just because I am her daughter, she feels she is not required to have a relationship with me, and she feels free because of this realization. Story 65. The day before my birthday, I wanted to wait to open my present until after we had supper on my birthday. She was rushing me to open it the day before, and I told her to calm down a bit. I ended up having to open it early, and she immediately got offended and yelled at me about how I was rude and that I needed to watch my attitude. The next day, my actual birthday, she didn't say a single word to me. She gave me the silent treatment all day and made me apologize to her before she said anything. She still didn't wish me a happy birthday afterward. Story 66. My mom is a good mother for the most part, but I find it frustrating that whenever I offer her advice on something, she says I'm treating her like a child. I'm not, but I think she knows this and is too sensitive to admit it. Story 67. Interfered with our adult daughter's visit with her father's family in that state on multiple occasions. Therefore, I haven't visited in years. Story 68. To provide context, my mother is not a child abuser. When I was around 13 to 15 years old, I was being disrespectful, and my mother punched me in the nose against the wall, causing me to bleed. It's worth noting that my mother rarely hits us, so she is not abusive. She just became angry. I also believe I reacted by attacking her out of anger, so I was not innocent either. That incident is the worst thing she has ever done, and it could have been prevented if I hadn't also been hitting my younger siblings in anger. I am much calmer now, but back then, I was a difficult child and do not feel I deserve the kindness I receive from my parents today. I even think I deserve to be locked up for my behavior, as I did engage in elder abuse and assault against my siblings, although I never seriously injured them. Around the ages of 15 to 16, I changed and stopped being so disrespectful, yet I still feel I do not deserve the privileges I have now. Story 69. I stayed in my house for the last few years when she told me she was just going to visit for a few months. Story 70. The worst thing my mother ever did was decide from the start that I wasn't worth much. She tried to push me into the lowest level of education, not because I needed it, but because she believed I was too unintelligent for anything else. When it turned out I wasn't lacking in ability, she was disappointed. Imagine that, being disappointed that your child isn't as useless as you thought. She never even attempted to figure out why school was difficult for me. I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder when I was 32. After struggling my whole life, I finally had an answer, and it was painfully obvious how much easier things could have been if someone had cared earlier. But no one did, least of all her. When I reached out to tell her, after more than 10 years of no contact, she acted shocked, as if she never could have seen it coming. Meanwhile, she had once thought I might be on the autism spectrum but decided not to bother checking. Not because she thought it wasn't true, but because she was too caught up in her own troubles to care. While she was busy with that, I was the one stuck in a system dragging me further down, shuffled from school to school, collecting learning gaps that apparently everyone could see, but none of those adults actually did anything about. And then there's the money. She spent years teaching me that my needs didn't matter, that I had no right to want anything. The moment I finally had something for myself, she took it, every cent, and when there was nothing left to take, she kicked me out, like I was an old piece of furniture just taking up space. No safety net, no backup plan, just gone. Now, looking back, all I hear is how hard she had it, how much she had to survive. Meanwhile, I was the one in survival mode with no one caring enough to notice. Her regret? Well, saying sorry is easy when it costs you nothing. But actually taking responsibility? We're still waiting on that. Story 71. I would need to write a book to explain. The short version is that she chose to have me in the first place, then consistently prioritized her own comfort and perceived happiness over my safety and well-being, which had extreme consequences. She now refuses to acknowledge this in any meaningful way and seems hurt and bewildered that we do not have any kind of relationship. She plays the martyr, claiming, "I guess I'm just the worst mother ever," while recounting completely fictional versions of events, and I do not accept it. Story 72. She has never been able to love me. She always compares me unfavorably to others, no matter how good I am or what success I achieve. She just doesn't love me enough to be proud. I used to blame myself and had a perfectionistic streak, needing to know everything and trying my hardest to be the best. As an adult, I now understand that it was never me. It was her shortcomings. My children have never felt unloved. Story 73. When I was date raped at the age of 21, I came home, showered, and told my parents the next day. My mother's response was, "Well, now you know how men really are." She later apologized briefly, but I imagine that was because of how her friends and sisters reacted. Story 74. She told me she didn't think I really loved her and that she thought my daughter, who is neurodivergent, was unloving because she doesn't respond and interact the way her other grandchildren do, and that she didn't even like being around her. It was a while before I saw her again. We're okay now, mostly. I think she was experiencing some kind of menopausal midlife crisis. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.